Welcome, traveller. Tonight we slip into a slow starlit investigation. Could the newly found interstellar visitor 3I Atlas be linked, mysteriously poetically, to the famous WOW radio signal heard 48 years ago? We'll treat this as a soothing thought experiment drifting between what we know and what we wonder. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from tonight? 3I Atlas is the third confirmed interstellar object seen in our solar system, an icy wanderer discovered in 2025. Picture a traveller that does not know our road signs, a visitor that slips into the neighbourhood and never once checks for a parking space. It comes in quick, bends graciously, and is gone, like a silent skater tracing a single curve across a frozen lake and never circling back. That is 3I Atlas, an interstellar wanderer that doesn't belong to our sun. Its path is an open arc rather than a loop, the kind of trajectory that says, as clearly as celestial mechanics can speak, I was born under another star. Even the math whispers it. This visitor carries more speed than our gravity can keep, a little extra momentum that turns a long fall into a one-time hello. Think of it as a snow-dark pebble that took a very long road. Before it brightened a few counts above the background in an astronomer's image, it spent ages in the deep, a place so cold that everything unnecessary becomes still. In that freezer of distances, ices can harden into glassy resolve. Dust can cling like old secrets, and the surface can be sandblasted by tiny, relentless collisions that no one sees. Only when the traveller glides into the sun's warmth do those secrets loosen. A wisp of vapour here, a faint mist there, a fragile veil that tries to become a coma or a tail. Nothing dramatic, just enough to say, I am waking. It will not come close to us. It will remain a careful guest, respectably distant, faint enough that you could stand under a rural sky all night and never know it passed. That's part of the charm. Most celestial visitors that make headlines swagger with brightness. This one invites humility. To meet it, you need patience, a telescope, and quiet software that can subtract the sky from itself until the small, moving thing emerges. Astronomers stack exposure on exposure like layering thin paper sheets, so a trace of light becomes a line you can follow. They blink images back and forth, letting the fixed stars stand as the wallpaper while the traveller moves a hair to the left, a hair to the right, a hair along the long road out. From those delicate measurements, an orbit takes shape, more a sketch at first than a portrait. 3 nights become 5, 5 become 10, and with each additional point the model stops wobbling. Numbers settle. How fast? Which direction? How close to the sun? How much it will bend and by how much it refuses to be caught? The eccentricity, if you want the formal word, sits beyond the threshold that binds a comet to our family. That single figure is like seeing a stranger walk briskly past your front door in hiking boots, backpack on, facing the horizon. You know they are passing through. Because it is the third of its kind we have recognised, it carries a kind of symbolic weight. The first one taught us to expect surprises. The second reminded us that interstellar can still look beautifully comedic. And the third says gently that this is not a curiosity but a population. Somewhere out there, other suns make their own small bodies. Rock, metal, ice, and dust. Then shuffle them with gravity the way surf tosses shells and sea glass toward the open ocean. Some are flung hard enough to escape, and a few will, after eons, sweep past another star and leave a thin signature on a camera sensor. Our solar system too probably sheds its own little ambassadors into the dark. To watch 3I Atlas is to glimpse that grand exchange, a slow commerce of pebbles between distant harbours. It is easy to imagine this traveller as perfectly smooth and alien, but reality is kinder and messier. Surfaces in space are scuffed. Volatiles hide beneath crusts. As sunlight warms one patch more than another, the object can breathe, soft puffs of gas that act like tiny thrusters. That breathing may make its spin wobble a little, may alter its path by almost nothing, yet enough that orbit fitters nod and say, "Yes, we see you." If a tail forms, it may be thin, a mere filament. If it remains mostly inert, that is a story too. Not every visitor wants to perform. In the language of sleep, this is the kind of character who sits quietly in the corner of the room and changes the mood by simply being there. There's a human story woven through the mathematics. Somewhere, a survey telescope's nightly plan unfolded with clockwork precision. The sky drifted over the detector, pixels filled with starlight. Algorithms swept for objects that moved like they meant it. A name was assigned, a provisional orbit drafted, and messages flew between teams as they booked follow-up time on other instruments. Someone took their coffee later than usual, watching graphs refine themselves into understanding. Someone else stepped outside at dawn, looked at a paling moon, and felt oddly connected to a faint smear of data they couldn't see with their own eyes. This is how discoveries often arrive, not with a shout, but with a quiet consensus that a thing is real. And then there's the feeling in your chest when you realise what interstellar actually implies. It did not grow up here, it does not share our sun's birth cloud, our family of resonances, our tidy commutes around the year. It is evidence from another laboratory, a sample from a different curriculum of heat and pressure and time. Perhaps its ices carry a slightly different recipe. Perhaps its dust grains tell a different story of how planets begin. Even if we never touch it, even if the best we can do is scatter its light through a prism and measure the faintest fingerprints of what it is made of, that is still contact. Contact with a past we did not live. We also learn a small lesson in scale. This object is not a city-sized monster, and it is not a spectacle for backyard eyes. It is a reminder that the universe is not obliged to pitch us fireworks. Much of the cosmos moves in the register of whispers. A whisper can be rigorous. A whisper can be enough. The numbers are careful, the plots are methodical, and the wonder is quiet. If you are lying in bed listening to this, you might notice that your own breath has taken on the rhythm of orbital mechanics. In and out, a gentle fall toward the sun, a graceful turn past perihelion, and a long, unhurried release back into the dark. Imagine, just for a moment, the perspective from the traveller's surface. Stars would shift in slow parallax as centuries ticked by. For ages, darkness. Then a distant ember swelling. Our sun, a mild lamp that grows warm and then blinks small again. In that brief warm interval, rocks crack softly, trapped gases stir. A dust grain lifts and floats away like a single snowflake leaving a mitten. No drama, only change. Only the kind of change that, added up over enough visitors and enough time, teaches a species like ours how planetary systems are made. When it leaves, it won't really be leaving us. It will be returning to where almost everything already is. The enormous in-between, the space between stars is not empty of meaning. It is a road, and roads are important even when they are quiet. Somewhere along that road, behind it and ahead of it, are other travellers we will not notice. And a few we will. For this one night we notice this one. We give it a name so that we can talk about it together. We learn what we can. We hold back from trying to make it more dramatic than it is, and as it slides away we don't feel abandoned. We feel included in a much larger conversation that takes place at a pace suited for sleeping minds and patient hearts. So let it pass. Let the equations guide it. Let the faint images stack into a memory that astronomers will keep, and that you can tuck under your pillow like a postcard from far away. There will be other nights, other visitors, other careful guests who cross our sky without ever needing to knock. For now, it is enough to know that this one came, that we noticed, and that somewhere, under another sun, the story that shaped it is still unfolding. Close your eyes. The road is long, the curve is gentle, and the universe is very, very calm. Trace the traveller's steps backward with a fingertip, not on a map, but on the soft dome of the sky in your mind. The line drifts toward a lanterned region where the Milky Way grows thick and buttery, toward the Archer's constellation, where old star clouds gather like campfires. It is the heartward direction, the side of the sky that faces inward, toward the crowded city centre of our galaxy. Even if you've never seen it in person, you can feel the density when you imagine it. Stars like grains of sugar spilled across black velvet, bright knots of newborn suns, dusky lanes of interstellar dust braided through it all. Sagittarius is where the river of the Milky Way seems to narrow and glow. In some parts of the world, people picture a teapot there, its spout tilted toward the galactic centre, as if the universe were pouring steam into the night. Around that spout, the starfields thicken, and the dark lanes between them become a kind of negative constellation, shapes of absence, letters the night writes in shadow. Nebbly drift within reach of binoculars, soft pinks and blue-grey petals in long exposures, whispers to the unaided eye. To point in that direction is to point toward immense company. But following a line on the sky is not the same as finding an origin in space. Constellations are masks we lay over everything, stitched from our stories and our eyesight. The path you trace across those shapes is a projection, flat, gentle, and deceptive in its simplicity. The real path has depth, slope, and patience. It climbs and falls through 3 dimensions, sliding past the sun, the way a high bird crosses a valley floor without ever touching the grass. If you could see that true arc, you'd understand how little the constellations constrain it. The archer, the teapot, the dust lanes, beautiful, helpful to know, but they are wallpaper on a cathedral, not the structure itself. Astronomers know this, and yet they also understand the comfort of direction. From Sagittarius can mean from the inner skyward side, the way a sailor says the wind is from the west. It is a bearing, a compass note. And bearings matter. They tell us how to listen. They help us plan where to point our instruments, how to choreograph our nights so that the faint traveller isn't lost in the crowd. Somewhere behind that word, Sagittarius, there are equations making tiny corrections, the way light is bent by gravity, the way the object's faint breath of gas nudges it, the way Earth's own motion makes the stars appear to slide. Imagine the reduction from raw images to meaning. Picture a handful of exposures from different nights, a starfield that looks the same to a casual glance, but in which one dot refuses to be faithful to yesterday's place. That dot is the clue. Link those places with slender threads and you get a sketch. Add more nights, more threads, and the sketch gains muscle and bone. Now rewind the threads, let the figure walk backward through the weeks and months, and see where the posture points when it's far away. Inward, toward the throng, toward the archer's shoulder of sky. Not a birthplace, just a footprint at the edge of a crowded plaza. The Milky Way itself complicates and consoles. Its central bulge lies along the line of sight in Sagittarius, wrapped in dust that hides and reveals in turn. Behind those curtains are the busy neighbourhoods of young, hot stars and old, cool clusters. Gas clouds collapsing, shock fronts glowing, and the deep, steady hum of the galaxy's core. You do not need to memorize names to feel the meaning. This is a rich background, a stage with many spotlights. When a lone traveller crosses it, even faintly, the contrast is striking. The small moving note on a score thick with chords. And yet the traveller's tale is not the galaxy's tale. Interstellar objects are likely flung from their home systems by messy, private family dramas. A giant planet wandering, a resonance sharpening, a long-ago gravitational elbow from a neighbour star. The direction we see now is the last quiet leg of a much older journey. Somewhere, under another sun, there might have been a gentle ejection a million seasons ago. Somewhere else, a passing star altered the trajectory by a whisper. The path today is the sum of those whispers. Pointing towards Sagittarius from our viewpoint might only be the last flourish of a pen after a sentence has already been written. It helps to think in layers. The nearest layer is us, Earth-turning, listening, blink, comparing images, stacking photons. The next layer is our solar system, its gravity shaping the traveller's curve into a one-time hello. Beyond that is the local stream of stars, each with its own families of planets and small bodies, all of them tugging lightly at one another over centuries. And then the wide layer, the galaxy itself, whose inner regions appear along the Sagittarius sightline. When we say the traveller's track crosses that direction, we are speaking across layers, a local motion against a distant tapestry. Even so, the symbolism is hard to resist. If your mind likes stories, it will suggest one. A messenger arriving along the boulevard that points toward the city's heart. The boulevard is crowded, the city bright, and the messenger quiet. No proclamation, no parade, just a wave from the road. You might be tempted to stitch that wave to another night long ago when our instruments heard something unusual from roughly that same quadrant. The mind is a gifted seamstress. It can make a pattern of nearly anything. Sometimes that's how new ideas start. Sometimes it's how lullabies start too. In the calm of this thought, consider the map on your ceiling if you live far north or far south. The Archer's stars sit lower or higher, depending on your latitude. And for some listeners, city lights or weather often keep that part of the sky hidden. It doesn't matter. The direction is an idea more than a view. You can carry it behind your eyelids, inward toward the crowded glow, inward toward where the star river tightens. If you have ever stood beneath a truly dark sky in summer and watched that river arch from horizon to horizon, you already know the feeling. If you haven't, the imagination will do. It can be just as generous at bedtime. There is a quieter layer still, the mathematics of uncertainty. Every measured position of the traveller has a tiny error bar, like a breath held a little too long. Astronomers gather these breaths and feed them into models, birthing a cloud of clones, each clone a slightly different version of the same path. Rewind the clones and you get a spray of possibilities that fans across space like paint from a brush. Some sweep near this cluster of stars, some near that, but as distance grows, the fan grows wider, and certainty thins to gauze. What remains solid is the bearing we first stated, from the heartward side, from the inner way, from the place where the galaxy looks busy. If you step outside and face south in northern lands, or north in southern lands, you can raise a hand and trace that bearing through your own local horizon's clutter. Rooftops, trees, a familiar antenna, the patient rectangle of a window. The act of pointing is the ritual. You're aligning your body with a trajectory written in slow ink. For a few breaths, you become part of the instrument that notices. You become a long single pixel in a planetary camera. The traveller does not know you're doing this, of course, but the noticing changes something in you. The sky starts to feel less like a ceiling and more like a hallway with many doors. The path from that direction and the path beyond it meet in your attention. There is no need to insist on a birthplace or a message. There is plenty to hold just as it is, a wandering pebble, a road that points inward, a backdrop of impossible abundance. If the traveller had instead traced back toward a thinner region of the Milky Way, the feeling would be different. Open fields, a long fence line, a quiet countryside. But it did not. It passed in front of the city. That is the poetry tonight. Let the image settle. The Archer's territory in your mind, the teapot steaming, the dark lanes like cooled lava across a lantern wall, and a tiny moving ember threading the scene. The ember keeps going. That is what embers do when they're caught in a draft. It leaves no scorch, no smoke, only the knowledge that something small and real crossed a place that seems too large for small and real things to matter. And yet they do. One such crossing teaches a technique, 2 teach patience, 3 suggest a population, 4 and 5 will give us statistics. Each time we will say again where the path seems to lean. Each time we will measure more carefully how projection and depth play together. For sleep, hold to this. Directions are invitation, not prisons. Towards Sagittarius invites you to turn inward, to picture the crowded glow, to appreciate the company our galaxy offers in that gaze. The traveller's footprints are almost nothing, yet they lead your mind across constellations like stepping stones placed in a stream. You're not required to reach the other bank tonight. You can stop midstream, listening to water, feeling the cool stones underfoot and watching the reflected city of stars tremble on the surface. When you move again, it will be slowly, and the stepping stones will still be there, and the archer will still be watching the same place, and the road through the heart of the galaxy will still be lit. The night is ordinary until it isn't. A summer evening in 1977 hums with the small machinery of crickets and fans, and somewhere in Ohio a wide listening instrument looks not with glass but with metal, quiet panels and a patient receiver, letting the turning of Earth sweep the sky across its ears. The telescope is called Big Ear, a name so simple a child could love it, and its job is as humble as it is grand. Listen for narrow, steady notes among the cosmic murmur, the kind of signal that, if you were feeling brave, you might call a hello. Inside, the work is paper and patience. This is the era of printouts, of lined sheets tugged through a tractor feed, of characters that mean more than they look like they do. The receiver translates the sky into columns, the columns into rows, the rows into a river of numbers and letters. Each character is an intensity, small digits for quiet, then letters for louder, a ladder built out of symbols. Most nights are a low whispering monotone, zeros, ones, twos, because space, for all its drama, is calm in the particular kind of calm this experiment seeks. And then, on one particular pass, the calm swells. The column speaks, 6EQUJ5. To a stranger, that looks like a code word or a license plate. To the person reading, it looks like a shout that somehow still fits inside the rules. The sequence climbs, peaks, and falls over precisely the span the telescope would expect as the sky slides. 72 seconds, the time it takes a fixed point in the heavens to drift through the beam, because the Earth is moving, because everything is in motion, because even listening requires the choreography of a planet turning under a dish. You can picture the hand that circles the printout. The pen marks a loop around the fierce little column, and beside it, in a burst of human honesty that makes the whole field feel like a living thing, someone writes a single word in the margin. Wow. It's not a formula or a footnote, it's a gasp. It's the sound we make when the ordinary suddenly grows teeth and eyes and addresses us directly. The word will eventually become the name of the event, as if the universe itself had spoken in our language. But that night, it is just surprise captured on paper. Surprise and the respectful awareness that something unusual has happened on the frequency of hydrogen, the quiet watermark of interstellar gas, the common tongue many searchers thought a sensible place to leave a message. What made it wonderful was not only the strength, it was the shape. The signal didn't smear and fidget the way lightning or machinery sometimes do. It didn't roar and fade like a storm. It rose as the beam found it, stayed high while the beam centered, fell as the beam let it go, like a bead of light passing a window. No drama, no flourish, just a tidy textbook passage. It felt like the cosmos clearing its throat and speaking exactly within the lines we had drawn for what artificial might look like. If you were the kind of person who believes meaning hides in restraint, this had the feel of meaning. But the very next thing science demands is not celebration. It is a sober question: will it happen again? Big Ear, with its two adjacent beams, offered a natural test. A steady source should glide through one beam, and then, a few minutes later, through the next. The second pass never came. On that night, the second ear stayed quiet. On later nights, when observers returned with hope sharpened into method, the same patch of sky offered only the soft hiss of nature's bedrock noise. The neat column of letters did not repeat. The universe, if it had spoken, did not feel the need to say it twice. From that absence grew a particular kind of mystery, one that is not theatrical but rigorous and stubborn. Maybe it was a satellite glancing a perfect blade of emission across the dish. Maybe it was a quirk of our own technology, a reflection, a once-only interference that had the terrible luck to wear the right costume. Maybe it was a natural burst from a cloud of gas lined up just so. The responsible mind writes these possibilities down, weighs them, tests what it can, discards what cannot hold, and keeps living with what remains. The story becomes a room you revisit over the years, dusting, rearranging, checking the window latch, knowing the room is still the room. There is a deeper tenderness hiding in the details. The numbers and letters that spelled the anomaly were not mere codes. They were the heartbeat of a method that accepts boredom as the cost of honesty. Night after night, the instrument listened. People checked logs, fed paper, penciled annotations, drank coffee, and fixed small quirks that only they and the machine understood. Out of all that patience came one slender spike of significance. It's tempting to say that this is unfair, that the universe should have been kinder and repeated itself, but the fairness lies elsewhere, in the fact that a single clean event can still change the way you hold the question. After that night, the search felt less like looking for a fantasy and more like waiting for a shy neighbour to glance over the fence. Set the scene in your imagination. Outside, the summer heat has given up some of its weight. The grass is damp, the telescope's metal slopes are pale. Inside, fluorescent lights hum softly, and the printout advances with a steady little burr. Someone leans in, finds the column, feels their breath compress for a second. The world does not change loudly. But somewhere inside the minds of those who care about such things, a door opens. If you have ever had a sentence read you rather than the other way around, you know the sensation. A line, a shape, a sound that arranges the furniture behind your eyes. Technically, it matters that the listening was tuned near the frequency astronomers call the hydrogen line, a natural radio colour that interstellar gas emits. Decades of hope had gathered around that choice. If anyone anywhere wished to be found across the chasms, they might choose a frequency that intelligent hearers would already be watching, a rendezvous point in the spectrum, a park bench under a well-known tree. The event's proximity to that bench is part of why it still flickers in memory. It felt like an appointment kept, and yet the appointment left no forwarding address. The coordinates were narrowed down to a pair of possibilities, separated by the geometry of the instrument, both in a dense and eloquent region of the sky. Observers returned again and again. Years drifted by. The same coordinates were combed with newer instruments, cleverer surveys, broader bandwidths, deeper patience. The results were clear in their quietness. If there was a beacon, it was not one that cared to be predictable. If it was a natural hiccup, it was a hiccup we have not learned how to make on demand. There is a humility in how the story is told by those who are there. No one claims more than the data can carry. The word in the margin does not become a verdict. It remains what it always was, a human exhale at the edge of the unknown. That restraint is part of why the event keeps its power, especially at night. It sits perfectly between certainty and wonder, a single footprint in damp ground with no other prints leading to or from it. You can kneel beside it and compare possibilities. You can measure it with a ruler, argue about the weight that made it, chart how fast it should have dried if the air had been warmer. You can also simply allow yourself to be moved by the fact that it exists. For sleep, here is the comfort. Some mysteries are not puzzles to be solved, but rooms to rest in. The wow. Night is such a room. It has windows that look out on hydrogen and starlight, a table where you can lay the printout flat and see the letters rise like a small mountain range, and a door left gently ajar in case the visitor returns. The quiet of later years does not erase the earlier moment. It frames it, the way silence frames a bell's last tone. When you breathe in, imagine the beam finding the source. When you breathe out, imagine the beam letting it go. In the middle, hold the shock of recognition. Something matched the pattern we made for meaning. If you like metaphors, think of a lighthouse you glimpsed once through fog, a perfect sweep of light that hovered just long enough to convince you it was there, and then the fog reclaimed the shore. You may never sail that exact stretch again under those exact conditions. You may never see the light repeat, but having seen it once, you navigate with a little more reverence. You check your bearings more carefully. You look up more often than you did before. The night someone whispered, "Wow," was ordinary in every way that matters. Ordinary equipment, ordinary paper, ordinary human bodies doing patient work. And that is exactly why it carries so much sweetness. It says that the universe, if it chooses to brush against us, can do so on a night like any other, within the reach of calm attention and modest tools. Let that be the lullaby. Not that an answer was found, but that a question was heard clearly once, and that we were listening well enough to say with honest surprise exactly what it felt like. Imagine stretching a silver thread from tonight all the way back to a summer evening in 1977, anchoring it to a single tidy column of numbers on a crinkled printout. The thread is thin but stubborn. It hums when you pluck it with a thought. On one end, a new interstellar traveller gliding through our solar system, a quiet guest that will not stay. On the other, a brief narrow note that rose and fell exactly as a disciplined signal should. Between them, 48 years of Earth turning, of comets shedding faint veils, of telescopes growing cleverer, of people aging and still looking up. The mind wants to tie the two ends into a bow. The sky being shy lets us try. Begin by rewinding the clock. Planets step backward along their ellipses like dancers working through the choreography in reverse. Earth tucks last year's seasons back into themselves. The moon unspools its phases. Even the sun drifts a hair through space against the far starfields. Now overlay the path of our visitor, but let it move in the way such travellers do. On a hyperbolic arc that doesn't close, a curve that says, "I was only passing through." Run that arc backward, and it aims toward the busy heartward side of the Milky Way. The direction where Sagittarius hangs like a lantern, where the background is not emptiness, but a city of stars. The famous signal's patch of sky lives there too. Or near enough for poetry. A corridor appears, not as a road with pavement, but as a line of sight, a way of aiming your attention through layers of distance that have never met. But a corridor is not a cause. In the dome of the sky our eyes share. Two things can align without ever sharing a history. The constellations are proof, bright strangers arranged by perspective into hunters and teapots and bows. So we test the thought. What would it mean for a fleeting radio note and a fleeting visitor to be linked? Not a simple "the object shouted and we heard it," because time does not allow that. The note we heard in 1977 was already old when it arrived. Even if its true origin were only tens of light years away, its beginning would belong to someone else's century. Our traveller, by contrast, is a slow courier by comparison with light, an object moving at mere tens of kilometres per second, covering only a few hundred astronomical units in 48 years, vast to us a shrug to space. The two clocks, photon fast and pebble slow, do not overlap without imagination's help. So try a different picture. Suppose there is a long, thin corridor that begins in some far system and happens, by geometry alone, to cross our neighbourhood and our attention twice, once by sound, once by presence. In 1977, a narrow beam, natural or made, slides across Earth like a flashlight briefly skating your window. Decades later, along almost the same bearing on our sky, an object not born here drifts through our local sunlight. The corridor is the coincidence, not the vehicle. We are the ones who stand at one end of it, and we cannot help but wonder whether anything besides perspective holds the line tight. There are more intricate sketches you can draw if you enjoy delicate thought work. Perhaps you say the object could act as a mirror or a lens, a cold, pitted body reflecting a radio shout toward us at just the right moment. Nature usually refuses that kind of theatrical precision, but bedtime grants us permission to imagine it and then gently set it down. Perhaps the object wasn't a mirror, but a milestone, a device or a relic placed along a route where beams sometimes travel, a moving signpost sweeping through our yard on a schedule so patient we cannot measure it with a single life. Or reverse the roles. Perhaps the signal was never meant for us, and we overheard it the way a passerby catches a line from a song in a stranger's headphones, while the traveller is only another passerby on the same street decades later. In each case, the thread is a metaphor. It connects meanings, not mechanisms. The sober mind asks for uncertainties, and we can offer them as a lullaby of numbers that soften the edges of desire. Every measured dot that marks the traveller's position has a small error bar, a little breath of doubt. When you rewind those dots into the deep past, the single path blooms into a trumpet-shaped cloud of possibilities, 100 slightly different tracks whispering through the same general corridor, but not the same exact points. The 1977 signal's coordinates are themselves a pair of options separated by the geometry of the instrument that heard it. 2 smudged addresses, 1 graceful guest, and a span of 48 years. You can see why certainty tips its hat and walks on. Even so, it is hard to resist the music of alignment. Human minds are expert at seeking constellations in coincidence, at sewing beads into necklaces, even when the beads were born on different shores. We do this not only because we are gullible, we do it because sometimes truth hides in patterns too faint for a single data point to reveal. Tonight, the pattern we entertain is simple and tender. Maybe, just maybe, the same inward-facing boulevard that delivered a radio curiosity to our receivers also, decades later, delivered a physical traveller to our telescopes. If it is only poetry, it is still good poetry. It invites us to hold 2 rare events in the same gentle hand and feel the weight of their rareness together. Let the physics soothe rather than scold. Light stitches the galaxy at the speed of a thought. Stones and ice drift like seeds in winter wind. A beam can arrive in a minute. A wanderer may cross a few hundred astronomical units in the span you and I call half a lifetime. There is no scandal in their mismatch. If there were engineers out there who wished to be noticed without being found, they might choose this very asymmetry, a signal on the one day from an address that shifts by the time anyone can follow it, a messenger on another day with no message on its surface at all, only composition, only silence, only the quiet fact of having been made elsewhere. That's a story that respects caution and privacy. It is also a story that lets you fall asleep with your curiosity intact. There is another, softer reason to keep the thread intact in our minds. Even without a physical link, the 2 moments, 1977 and now, taught us the same lesson in different tongues. The radio note taught us how much a single clean mystery can renovate our questions. The traveller teaches us how global patience, surveys, stacking, careful fits can reveal citizens of other suns without fireworks. Both moments reward attention. Both ask us to become more precise in our listening, to widen the circle of what we consider plausible, to accept that some answers will come with time and that some will remain half-lit forever. If you needed an image to take into sleep, make it this. You are standing at night in a long hallway whose far end you cannot see. Somewhere in that distance, a door opens just enough to let a sliver of light cut across the floor for a minute and then close. Many years later, along the same hallway, a visitor walks past without knocking, soft-footed, breath clouding faintly in the cool. The line of light and the quiet pedestrian may not know each other, but their presence along the same axis changes how you feel about the hallway, becomes less like a blank and more like a place. We do not need to finish the puzzle to be comforted by it. It is enough for now to hold the silver thread between finger and thumb and feel how it sings when plucked. A note from then, a presence from now, the same inward direction, the same star-thick backdrop, the same old human wish to be part of a conversation larger than our address. Breathe with the rhythm of it, back to the printout, forward to the faint moving dot, back to the hydrogen-coloured bench where we first agreed to meet, forward to the third traveller that tells us these guests are a population and not a once upon a time. The bow does not have to be tied tightly. It only has to hold long enough for you to drift, smiling into the long, forgiving dark. To beam is to take something that loves to spread. like light, like radio, and teach it discipline. Imagine the difference between a campfire and a lighthouse. A fire throws warmth in every direction and fades quickly. A lighthouse narrows its brilliance into a blade that reaches astonishingly far. Beaming is that narrowing, shaping a radio wave so most of its strength goes one way on purpose toward a chosen patch of sky. It is intention written in physics. The universe rewards this intention with distance. When you send a signal everywhere, it thins out like breath in winter. When you send it somewhere, the thinning is slower. The beam's sharpness is set by two simple things: the colour of the radio light and the size of the mirror that forms it. Longer wavelengths spread more, bigger dishes tame them better. If you could look at a beam from far away, you'd see a soft cone with a bright heart, narrow enough that a planet is either inside it or not, the way a spotlight either finds an actor's face or leaves them in shadow. Power matters, but shape matters more. A modest transmitter attached to a large, well-aimed dish can whisper farther than a sloppy powerhouse. That is why people who dream of interstellar contact favour narrowband notes, signals packed into a hair-thin slice of the spectrum. A narrow note lifts above the natural hiss of space because in that hair-thin slice there is less noise to compete with. The receiving instrument can search for that note like a musician tuning to a single pitch in a quiet room, and a gentle carrier tone can travel an unreasonable distance if it refuses to spread its energy too widely. Now picture the long journey a beam must make. It crosses the cold between stars where there is almost nothing to scatter it, yet not quite nothing. Wisps of gas and magnetic fields can nudge a signal's polarization, jostle its phase, bend it slightly. Over tens or hundreds of light years, those nudges are tender, the kind of mischief that matters to an engineer but not to a bedtime story. The greater challenge is simply the math of distance. Every doubling of range thins the brightness by a factor that feels unfair to the heart and perfectly fair to the equations. Beaming doesn't cancel that law, but it plays it like a violin, focusing enough energy into a small solid angle that the faraway note remains audible. A beam that hopes to be recognised also has to cope with motion. Planets spin, orbit, wobble. A transmitter's home world moves, the receiver's world moves. Even the transmitter and receiver themselves can vibrate, flex, thermal breathe. Motion paints a slow slope across the signal's frequency, a Doppler drift, like the pitch of a passing siren changing as it approaches and recedes. Those who design searches correct for this. They let their software test many little slopes asking, is there a note here that slides gently up or down in just this way? A deliberate beacon maker might even anticipate this courtesy and choose a frequency where the drift will be easy to track, or might deliberately encode a tiny regular wobble as a signature that says, this is not weather. Then there is the question of where in the spectrum to plant your flag. Some choose the hydrogen line, the quiet, natural radio colour of the most common element in the cosmos, because it is famous and sensible, a universal park bench. Others look just to the side in the waterhole between hydrogen and hydroxyl lines, a metaphorical oasis where listeners might gather. A truly cautious sender could pick a totally unremarkable frequency, counting on very long dwell times and very narrow bandwidth to make the note stand out anyway. None of these choices are right or wrong, each is a style of hello. Messages are a different art from beacons. A beacon says someone is here in the simplest possible grammar, a clean tone, perhaps pulsing, perhaps counting, perhaps repeating a prime number rhythm that chemistry and mathematics would both applaud. A message says, sit down, we have a story. That requires more bandwidth, more power, more time, and a great deal more humility. Across light years, error creeps in, bits flip, rain falls, receivers sneeze. Encoding has to be patient and forgiving, and it must assume the listener knows nothing about the sender's customs. For this reason, many dreamers imagine that if there is to be any contact at all, it will begin with a beacon, a knuckle tapped politely on a cosmic doorframe, long before any long conversation. When people wonder about beaming in relation to a passing interstellar object, the imagination tries many costumes. Could a traveller like 3i Atlas be a lantern? A relay? A mirror? A lantern would glow on purpose, but that would take its own power, its own antenna, its own careful aim. A tall order for a body that looks and behaves like a natural fragment of ice and dust. A relay suggests a device listening in one direction and resending in another. But relays are fussy. They must know where to point, when to listen, and when to speak. A mirror is simpler, just reflect what arrives. But space is not generous with perfect mirrors. Rock and ice at radio wavelengths tend to be rough, absorbing, reluctant. They reflect like a frosted window, scattering more than they beam, and the glints they do produce are brief and brutally angle-dependent, the way a single facet of a distant disco ball might flash for a heartbeat and then go dark. Even if a mirror glint occurred, think about the geometry. For a specular reflection to aim straight at Earth, the object's surface would have to present the right angle at the right instant, while the original beam from somewhere else arrived at precisely that patch. The odds are not zero, but they are the kind that empty pockets and fill poems. The more comfortable picture, and the kinder one for sleep, is that beaming, if it happened at all, would have been done from a stable perch, a transmitter fixed to a world or a station that can aim for long hours with calm hands, while our listening passes under it like a slow, predictable metronome. There is also the economy of kindness in beaming. Broadcasting in all directions is like trying to light an entire forest with a single candle. Everything gets a little, and no one gets enough. Beaming says, "I see you," and concentrates care on a tiny place. The narrower the beam, the more often the sender must choose. Which stars, which seasons, which times feel generous. You can sweep a beam like a lighthouse so that many worlds take turns in the glow, or you can fix it like a finger pointing steadily at one address. Either strategy can produce a one-time 72-second hello to a drifting ear if beam and planet happen to intersect only once in a great while. The important thing is not the elaborate story we hang on that moment. It is that the moment is possible. Physics permits it. Intention makes it likely. If you enjoy numbers, you can cradle a few without letting them keep you awake. The sharpness of a beam is roughly the radio colour divided by the dish size. Long wavelengths need wide mirrors. Shorter wavelengths behave more like lasers. The louder a beam appears at the far end is the real power multiplied by the mirror's ability to focus. An effective loudness pointed in one direction. Every doubling of distance dims that loudness by 4 and then by 4 again and again, yet a narrow stubborn note can still reach across hundreds of light years if it is patient and if someone is listening. Our instruments are good at listening. They pour long nights into integrating faint tones, stacking seconds into minutes, minutes into hours, until a line emerges from noise like a path worn through tall grass. Skeptics add one more strand. The shape of a real deliberate beam would show a certain etiquette as it crossed our field of view. It would rise and fall with our instrument's pattern. It would drift in frequency by an amount that matches orbital mechanics. It might carry a fingerprint of modulation, tiny ticks or breaths that reveal a clock, a geometry, a mind. This etiquette is why that old 72-second note still glows in memory. Its rise and fall match the way a beam should look as Earth turned. One can love that elegance without promising more than it gives. So what would beaming mean if you hold it gently? It would mean that somewhere, someone accepted the laws of radio as a friendly game. They chose a frequency where the natural world is quiet. They built a mirror wide enough to hold the beam together. They aimed with patience and allowed for the dance of planets. They traded extravagance for focus and faith for engineering. They knew that most nights would pass without anyone being under the light at all, and that once in a long while, a receiver would move exactly through the bright part of the cone, and a printer would spit out a column that makes a human hand write a small, excited word. And if 3i Atlas has nothing to do with any of this, the lesson remains sweet. Beaming is not just a technical term, it is a posture. It says, choose a direction, Give what you have to that direction. Keep the signal simple. Trust that attention makes improbable meetings possible. A bottle tossed upon the ocean does not know who will find it. A lighthouse does not know which ship will be grateful tonight. A narrowband note does not know which civilization will be awake and listening when the beam passes. It is enough to send properly. It is enough to listen properly. Somewhere between the sender's mirror and the listener's ear, meaning will have the chance to happen. So let the word roll slowly in your mind, beam. A line drawn through darkness. A vow to be clear rather than loud. A small mercy offered. Across distances so large they turn numbers into poetry. If you close your eyes now, you can feel how such a line might move over you, rising as it finds you, steady as it holds you, falling as it lets you go, leaving behind nothing but a softer kind of curiosity and the sense that for a moment, somewhere, someone aimed. When people hear the word signal, they picture a sender. Nature, however, has a long repertoire of signals that nobody meant to send. Clean, concentrated moments that look like messages because physics likes to organise itself in surprising ways. If you sit with the sky long enough, you learn its stagecraft. How it can narrow a beam without an engineer, amplify a whisper without a transmitter, and time its brightness so neatly that your instruments nod as if to say, yes, this is exactly how an artificial source would pass. The trick is not that the universe is trying to fool us. The trick is that it runs the same equations we would run if we were trying to be tidy. Begin with the most elegant imposter, the astrophysical maser. In certain clouds where gas is pumped by starlight shocks or heat, atoms and molecules can fall into a peculiar state where they copy each other's light. One photon nudges the next, which nudges the next, and the result is a narrow bright line. Stimulated emission. Nature's laser at radio wavelengths. There are water masers, hydroxyl masers, silicon monoxide masers, each choosing its own radio colour, and singing in a pitch so precise that an antenna can catch it like a tuning fork. They are not messages, they are chemistry and crowd behaviour, molecules agreeing for a little while to act in chorus. Some masers burble on for years, some flare and fade, some hide in star-forming regions like neon signs behind gauze. A telescope moving across such a source can record a rise and fall of power that looks satisfyingly deliberate, even when the only intention is the universe's tendency to self-organise. There are other kinds of bright surprises. Fast, energetic outbursts, flares from stars, shocks in plasma, sudden rearrangements in magnetic fields, can spray radio light across the dial. Most are messy, broad and brief, but the path between sender and listener is not empty. It is a living medium. Interstellar plasma, clumpy and restless, can act as a lens. It can focus and defocus radio waves the way hot air above a road wobbles the horizon. This scintillation is the same family of effect that makes stars twinkle. At radio frequencies, it can sculpt a signal into peaks and valleys, raising it above the noise and then letting it sink on timescales of seconds to minutes. Your instrument sees a tidy hill where the beam passes. The sky has merely poured an uneven river through a windy canyon. It feels like intention because the timing is neat. In truth, it is optics with a mischievous grin. Hydrogen itself, quiet and abundant, offers its own illusions. Clouds of neutral hydrogen glow at a very particular radio colour, a standard candle in the spectrum that astronomers love. Those lines can drift and sharpen as gas moves toward or away from us, as temperatures change, as turbulence thickens or thins. A narrow slice of such emission wandering into your bandpass when Earth's rotation sweeps your antenna across it can look like a compact, well-behaved source sliding through your gaze. If the cloud is filamentary, long and thin, nailed to the sky by chance, it may pass through your beam like a needle, gifting you a 60 or 70-second wink without any promise to repeat. Then there are the mirror tricks no one ordered. Radio waves bounce. They bounce off metal in orbit, off the skin of aircraft, off wind-ruffled satellites that aren't supposed to be speaking at your frequency at all. They diffract along edges, leak through seams, and combining in electronics to make ghost tones, intermodulation products that didn't exist in the sky but are born in your receiver like dream echoes. Even in a protected band where the rules say no transmitters here, small sins and distant leaks happen, and reflections can tuck a forbidden whisper into your beam for a single pass. The night is quiet until an airplane angles just so, a satellite panel briefly glints, a ground transmitter finds a side door, and a neat, narrow visitor appears wearing the right clothes before stepping away forever. The beam of your own telescope adds choreography. Every instrument has a shape, strong in the middle, soft on the edges, and as the Earth turns, that shape sweeps the sky with metronomic grace. Anything compact will look like a swell and sink as it crosses the bright centre and exits through the dimmer skirt. Natural and unnatural, deliberate and accidental, all sources obey that geometry. This is why certain one-off events feel convincing. They show the exact rise and fall the beam pattern predicts. But beam obedience is not proof of authorship. It is merely good manners in the court of measurement. Polarization too can play dress up. Radio light can arrive twisted, electric fields marching in a particular direction, rotating with frequency, or switching handedness. Magnetic fields in space twist polarization predictably. Metal and circuitry twist it capriciously. A polarized flare refracted by plasma can thread a narrow eye of detectability that opens just as your antenna looks and closes just as it passes, leaving you with a clean, single-peaked signature and a mystery that feels purposeful. Nature loves such narrow eyes. We notice them because our machines are good at noticing. Even meteors, which we usually meet as streaks of visible light, have a radio life. Their trails can act like brief tilting mirrors, better at lower frequencies, but not entirely silent higher up, momentarily relaying distant transmitters into your protected patch. The glint might last seconds, a minute, less, and be gone, as if someone had flicked a laser pointer across the wall of your lab. You can almost hear a human voice in such a thing, but if you slow down and breathe, you recognize the old theme: reflection, refraction, a coincidence of angles. Comets carry hydrogen shrouds, vast, soft envelopes that grow as sunlight breaks water into simpler parts. Those shrouds can glow near the same noble frequency astronomers cherish. Pass your beam across the right slice at the right moment, and you might catch a brightening that feels like a deliberate shout, though it is really a faint, natural fog lit by chemistry and the sun's patient knife. Most of the time, these glows are spread out and gentle. Now and then, structure within the fog, or the way your beam grazes a denser vein, can carve a moment that looks suspiciously like a voice. And then there are the sources we catalogue as if they were people because they act with such personality. Pulsars that tick in radio like distant metronomes. Rotating radio transients that stutter with rare, loud syllables. Magnetars that can crack and hiss. Galaxies whose central engines roar so fiercely that narrow features ride on their breath. Many are broadband, many are too fast or too slow, many live at frequencies other than the quiet hydrogen bench. But together they remind us that the sky's dictionary is thick. If your ear is tuned to a single page, a word from another page can sneak by and rhyme perfectly by chance. The in-between space complicates with kindness. Interplanetary plasma, the thin wind from our sun, can add a gentle warble, especially when our line of sight passes near the sun's broad crown. The ionosphere, that restless shell of charged air above Earth, bends and rotates polarization, opening and closing small windows in time within the planet's own weather. None of this aims at you, all of it affects you. A pristine one-time passage can be the meeting point of 5 small independent effects, each too modest to notice alone, and yet together giving you a column of characters on a page that takes your breath. Modern listeners carry a bag of counter tricks to keep from being fooled. They split the sky into many beams at once and ask, did this appear everywhere or only where a sidelong reflection would dab it? They look in 2 places. on target and off target rapidly alternating, to see if a curious tone follows the telescope or stays put like a star. They search for the little slopes in frequency that planets impose, the Doppler fingerprints that say this lived out there, rather than this was born in your cable. They cross-check polarization, compare with satellite almanacs, time their observations so the sun's mood is known, and log their own electronic hiccups like a ship's physician, noting every cough. And still, sometimes, the sky moves in such a poised way that all the checks say, yes, this is clean, and the event refuses to repeat. A good mystery respects the process even as it survives it. It helps, as you drift towards sleep, to adopt the sky's perspective. There is no obligation to theatre up there. A narrow band note can be honest hydrogen. A single tidy rise and fall can be a filament sliding through your beam, a brief focusing by a patch of turbulent plasma, a reflection off an unsuspecting panel far above the atmosphere. The fact that something looks like what we would do if we were trying to be noticed does not mean someone was trying. It means that design and nature share a language. Both prefer efficiency, symmetry, and clarity when those are available. We read that language and sometimes mistake grammar for autobiography. Hold that thought gently. It does not reduce the wonder, it makes the wonder sturdier. Because if the sky can produce such disciplined, message-like moments without an author, then the world we inhabit is richer than a stage with only two kinds of actors, us and them. It is a place where gas can sing like an instrument, where magnetic fields can sculpt sound like a conductor, where chance alignments can draw straight lines sharper than a surveyor's string. And if, beneath that wealth of tricks, there also exists intention somewhere, someone beaming for real, our instruments will be better companions for having learned every natural accent first, so let the possibilities line up on your bedside table like smooth stones. A mazer's narrow choir, a hydrogen filament caught just right, plasma focusing a faraway burble into a crisp syllable, a reflection you did not invite, a beam pattern doing what beam patterns do. Each stone is small, together they make a path. Walk it slowly with your eyes closed. The path does not have to end at certainty tonight. It only has to carry you far enough that you can feel the difference between a trick and a lie. The sky does not lie, it simply performs, endlessly, with no audience in mind. We are the ones who bring the chairs and sit quietly, hands folded, happy to applaud when a scene happens to resemble a hello. The story that began with paper and patience now unfolds with silent forests of metal spread across mountains and deserts. Where one observatory once listened with a single wide ear, many now listen together. Dishes like pale moons facing upward. Arrays of antennas rattling faintly in the breeze. Fibre optic threads carrying sky sound to rooms where the night is translated into numbers. The listening has changed its posture from solitary to communal. Big Ear had one beam and two chances. Today's instruments braid thousands of tiny chances into a rope strong enough to pull a whisper out of the cosmic surf. Start with the simplest image. A field of radio dishes tracking the same patch of sky as if they agreed on something without speaking. Each dish hears a slightly different version of the same song. Tiny timing offsets. Tiny phase differences. In the control room, computers align those versions so well that the differences vanish and the signal sharpens. It's like asking a choir to breathe together. What was many becomes one, and the one grows exquisitely precise. This is how the modern sky is made to confess, not by shouting, but by synchrony. The paper printouts are gone. In their place live rivers of voltage, raw, humming time series captured with clocks so accurate they could count the years of a mountain. Instead of a few columns of characters, there are petabytes gliding into storage like snowfall. Software now does the circling a human hand once did. It searches millions of frequencies at once, tests thousands of tiny slopes where Doppler drift could hide, peels away radio chatter from Earth, and asks over and over, is there anywhere a tone that refuses to be random? When it finds a maybe, it keeps the baseband, the original heartbeat of the sky, so the moment can be replayed in slow motion, examined from every angle and shared with other instruments half a world away. The choreography of the hunt has grown more graceful. In the Big Ear era, you stared and hoped. Now, telescopes often dance an on-off cadence, on the candidate, off to a nearby empty patch, back on, then off again, like tapping a glass to make sure the ring you hear isn't coming from the room you're standing in. A genuine sky voice will stay put. Earthly mischief follows the telescope or floods every direction at once. This simple rhythm, on, off, has become a lullaby of caution that saves time and protects wonder from being spent frivolously. The sky itself is sampled with more imagination. Some programs tilt their attention toward nearby, sun-like stars and known exoplanets, lingering long enough that a shy beacon would have time to breathe. Others sweep the whole vault in great sheets, trading depth for breadth, searching not for a single needle but for any flash of silver anywhere in the hay. Still others listen commensally, hitchhiking on regular astronomy, galaxy surveys, pulsar timing, maps of interstellar gas, so that every photon caught for one purpose can be quietly asked to testify for another. The same hardware that studies the birth of stars can, with a clever switch of software, become a watchman for techno-signatures while the astronomers sleep. The places we listen have changed too. Some instruments live where radio laws and geography conspire to hush the modern world, valleys where phones fall silent, plateaus far from cities, high deserts under cold, dry skies. Elsewhere, arrays spread across savannas and karoo, fields and tundra, learning to ignore the grumbles of passing satellites and airplanes, the way a parent learns to sleep through a train that rattles the midnight window. Even the noisy parts of the spectrum are being tamed by cunning. Multiple beams at once, polarization checks, real-time catalogues of orbiting hardware, machine learning guard dogs that bark at the signature of a microwave oven and wag for the signature of a star. The frequencies, those sacred park benches in the spectrum, are no longer the only seats we try. Yes, the old rendezvous near hydrogen is still watched, but ears now roam wider, up into quiet glassy bands where narrow notes can hide, down into long, rolling wavelengths that see the sky's grander structure and might catch a different style of greeting. And beyond radio, there are eyes for light itself. Optical telescopes counting nanosecond flashes, searching for needle-thin laser pings that would pass where photons crowd thickest. To listen now is to accept that hello could wear many costumes. With all this capacity comes the humility of scale. The cosmic haystack is not a metaphor the mind should swallow in one bite. It's a map with dimensions our intuition rarely holds at once. Where on the sky you look, at what frequencies, how finely you slice those frequencies, with what drift you allow for moving worlds, with what polarization you expect, how long you stare, how often you return, what kind of modulation you consider plausible, how far away you imagine the sender to be. Every improvement carves away a measurable chunk of possibility. Every hour of silence thickens the line around what would no longer have escaped us if it were common. The quiet is not empty, it is a boundary being drawn. And still, even with giant ears, we return sometimes to the same old coordinates that lit the margin of a page in 1977, because rituals matter. The modern instruments sweep that region in minutes and in months, in narrow combs and broad brushes, in radio and in light, asking whether the shy source might clear its throat again. So far, the answer in that patch has been steady and kind. Not a no, just a continued not yet. In place of a second shout, we have something equally precious but less cinematic. A deepening catalogue of what definitely isn't there on the nights we listened. That catalogue is how you turn a ghost story into a measurement. On the way from single ear to many, lessons were learned the hard way. More than once, instruments have celebrated a strange, exquisite chirp, only to discover a terrestrial prankster in disguise. A door that opens, a kettle that boils, a radar that glances off the atmosphere and returns dressed as a star. Each has, at times, made professionals blush and improve their filters. This is how the field gets sturdier. Every embarrassment becomes a calibration. Every false positive tightens the weave of the net. If a priceless signal ever lands there, it will be measured by a community that has been lovingly inoculated against wishful thinking. The community itself is part of the upgrade. What was once a handful of teams is now a tapestry. Radio astronomers, optical observers, engineers, data scientists, statisticians, archivists, and citizen listeners who surf public databases at home. Open data has turned, "I think we saw something," into "please look with us." A candidate tone in one hemisphere can now sprint around the world in seconds, and a different telescope under a different sky can be on target, while the first one is still deciding what it feels. Coordination has become a sense organ. The patchwork of many instruments is, together, a single, global instrument with many eyelids. The algorithms that sift the night have learned patience and playfulness in equal measure. They are trained on fields full of real sky and real mischief so that a new pattern is not discarded simply because it is unfamiliar. They hunt across drifts and jitters, ready to catch a note that slides like a violin string tuned by a planet's motion or trembles like a transmitter mounted on a moon. When they flag a candidate, they save more than a summary. They save the raw moment so that future, better tools can revisit it the way a grandchild revisits an attic and finds treasure in a box the family once glanced at and forgot. Nothing truly interesting is allowed to vanish anymore. In this era, silence has become a teacher rather than a scold. When a wide survey hears nothing intentional at certain powers and distances, that absence becomes a line in a paper. No transmitters brighter than this, beaming like so from these stars. During these hours, a repeat for thousands of stars, millions of channels, years of listening, and the lines become a shape like an emptiness with edges, telling us how rare certain kinds of beacons must be. The result is not disappointment, it is relief. Reality is being mapped. The unknown is shrinking in honest ways. Through it all, the spirit that animated Big Ear endures. The old telescope circled a single column with a ballpoint pen and a human exhale. The new telescopes circle with code and consensus. Both gestures are love letters to attention. The tools have grown enormous and subtle. The goal remains ordinary and brave, to catch somewhere a tone that holds still against the noise long enough to convince us it is deliberate. If that happens tomorrow, the world will have the machinery to answer with care. If it happens in a century, the machinery will be better, and our grandchildren will know how to look us in the eyes and say softly, "We listened well. We were ready." Until then, picture the giant ears turning in choreographed quiet. Picture the fibre and copper veins beneath them carrying currents like mountain streams. Picture monitors glowing in midnight control rooms while rain ticks softly on the roof and distant wildlife questions the night. Picture a line on a plot that might be nothing or everything, and a small collective inhale as the on-off dance begins. The vast network of attention continues night after night, stitching the sky to itself. The data flows, the haystack thins, the world sleeps a little easier, knowing that when the cosmos does decide to lean toward us and speak clearly, someone will be awake, someone will be kind, and the pencil will already be in the margin waiting. Begin with a promise to yourself. If the idea is beautiful, you will test it beautifully, not by shouting at the sky, but by arranging a quiet laboratory in which the universe can answer with minimal effort. The lab is spread across continents and centuries, archives for its notebooks, telescopes for its eyes, equations for its careful hands. The hypothesis is simple enough to fit on a scrap of paper. Perhaps the famous radio note and this new interstellar traveller share more than a direction. Perhaps a mechanism, natural or engineered, binds them. Everything that follows is patience arranged into steps. First, rewind with care. The traveller's present-day path is a thread, but the past is a plume. You gather every measured position, attach their tiny uncertainties like fireflies, and seed a flock of clones, thousands of nearly identical objects, then let them fly backward under gravity. Planets, the sun, the tide of the galaxy. You include what matters and politely ignore what doesn't. Where a single line once was, there is now a trumpet-shaped cloud of possibilities that widens with time. Through that cloud you cast the line of sight that Big Ear stared along in 1977. Do they overlap at any distance that makes sense? Do enough of the clones cross that corridor to make coincidence feel like choreography? If they do not, the romance cools. If they do, you do not declare victory. You draw a circle in your notebook around interesting, keep going. Then rebuild the Night of the Note as if it were a stage set. You reconstruct the beam pattern, the way gain rises and falls across the sky. You restore the drift scan, where Earth's rotation drags the heavens past the fixed ear. You calculate second by second how long a compact source would sit inside the brightest part of the beam and how it would rise and fade. You repeat the exercise for both of the instrument's adjacent beams, because the geometry offered two possible sky tracks that night. In your model, the signal should visit one beam, and then, a few minutes later, the other. In reality, only one beam sang. You test whether a source with a small amount of wonder or a beam with a slight asymmetry can replicate the pattern. If your reconstruction reproduces the exact shape and timing of the old curve with only simple assumptions, the idea moves from poetry to plausible geometry. Next, interrogate the mirror dream. If the traveller were only a reflector, an accidental facet pointing just so, could a faraway beam have bounced from it to us? You treat the object as a rough icy rock at meter-scale radio wavelengths. You estimate a radar cross-section using surfaces that are not smooth but pitted, frosted, dussy. You let it tumble with a period pulled from photometric flickers. You let sunlight puff a jet from a warm patch and change the tumble slightly. You compute how often a specular glint would hit any single point in space and how long it would last. The numbers will likely be merciless, but you do not require mercy, only truth. If the glint probability is functionally zero, you file mirror under poem. If it is small but not absurd, you design an optical counterpart. Look for spark-like microflares in reflected sunlight, needle-thin specular flashes consistent with flat facets. A handful of such flashes, repeating with a spin phase, would be a clue. Their absence is also a clue. Meanwhile, treat the traveller as a possible lantern even if it looks like stone. You organise a ring of radio observatories to follow it across the sky at the gentle frequencies listeners favour. Around the hydrogen line and its quiet neighbours, you carve a comb of channels. You permit drift, not just one slope, but a family of slopes that a transmitter on a moving, wobbling platform would imprint. You alternate on-off pointing to purge local mischief. You record baseband, the raw heartbeat of the sky, so that if anything interesting inhales, you can replay it with more delicate ears later. You watch polarization for signatures that betray a designed antenna rather than an ionized fog. You synchronize time to better than a heartbeat, because if two sites hear the same narrow tone and their clocks agree to the microsecond, you can triangulate, you can rule out tricks, you can point other instruments in real time. Parallel to listening, you sharpen your eyes. You collect light curves, measurements of brightness over hours and nights, until a rotation period emerges. Does the brightness change because the body is elongated, or because shiny patches sweep past? You watch for colour shifts that betray fresh ice or unusual minerals. You attempt thermal measurements when the geometry is kind. How warm is the surface for the amount of sunlight it drinks? Warmth tells you about texture and porosity. Porosity hints at age and origin. You look for faint comet-like breath, and you measure tiny non-gravitational accelerations that such breath can cause. If the object accelerates without enough outgassing to explain it, you ask harder questions about area-to-mass ratio. Whether sunlight itself is pushing more than it should, then let the numbers either calm that thought or keep it awake. There is archaeology in the plan too. You visit the attic of the sky, archives, old tapes, old drums of data, old voltage streams if any survived. You digitize what has not yet been digitized. You resynchronize clocks that once drifted. You run modern filters on yesterday's noise. Did any other observatory record a narrow tone from the same patch of sky within that week, within that hour? You search for coincidences that history never had the bandwidth to notice. In the same breath, you audit Earth. You pull logs for satellite transmissions, aircraft paths, ground transmitters known and rumoured. You examine the parts per million where microwave ovens, telemetry beacons, radar sidebands can impersonate the sky. If a subtle terrestrial rhythm matches the old event, you take off your hat to the mystery, say thank you, and let it go with a smile. The hardest part to test is timing. A real link between an object moving at tens of kilometers per second and a radio note travelling at the speed of light requires choreography across light years. So you lay out timelines like strips of vellum on a table, one for the hypothesized sender, one for the object, one for Earth. You write on each strip when it was where. You mark the retarded times, the then that could become now, after light has done its journeying. You ask whether any star along the corridor could have seen the object in a useful position long before we did, sent a beam along that shared line, and had that beam reach Earth in 1977, while the object was still nowhere near our neighbourhood. It is a puzzle of geometry and patience. If the strips never cross in a way that respects causality, you turn that into peace rather than disappointment. If they almost cross, you hold that almost gently, and may be worth one more look, never more than that. At some point you must count, not just imagine. You define a null hypothesis. These are independent curiosities that happen to line up in our sky, and you measure how often such lining up would occur across the whole vault, across decades of listening and the handful of interstellar visitors we have recognised so far. You roll Monte Carlo dice, randomise directions for phantom visitors, sprinkle one-off signals across the sphere, fold in the peculiar biases of our telescopes and schedules, and compute how often a corridor as neat as this appears by accident. If chance makes such corridors often, you take a deep breath and feel the thrill of coincidence without the weight of meaning. If chance makes them rarely, you do not leap. You narrow your eyes, design a sharper test, and keep your voice low. There is room in the plan for ambitious gestures. If the traveller brightens enough and geometry smiles, you try for radar, the gentlest possible tap with a narrow pulse, listening for a whisper of echo that can reveal size, spin, surface roughness. Most nights, distance will make this impossible. The attempt itself will teach you sensitivity and patience that transfers to the next visitor. You might even try coordinated optical/radio interrogations with the utmost respect. Not commands, just timed attention. For instance, count primes with a low-power optical beacon, while radio ears wait in neighbouring bands for any sympathetic reply. The sky owes us nothing. Courtesy is part of the experiment. Negative results are not emptiness, they are rulers laid against the unknown. If no narrow tone follows the object during its passage, you publish upper limits. No transmitter brighter than this, beaming narrower than that, within these frequencies and these drifts, during these hours. If no microflares decorate the light curve, you bound the fraction of its surface that could be mirror smooth. If the reconstructed past refuses to overlap the 1977 corridor except under contortions, you say so plainly and tuck the idea among the pleasant, retired what-ifs. The world is kinder when our curiosities end with measurements rather than shrugs. All through this, you keep people involved the way the sky keeps stars, in clusters. Observatories in different hemispheres share targets and baseband. Students learn to nurse temperamental receivers through long winter nights. Engineers tune clocks until a second becomes a sacred object. Data scientists teach algorithms to be skeptical without being blind. Citizens download open data sets and point out oddities nobody else had time to see. The test becomes a community which is its own quiet success. If, along the way, something truly strange peeks out, an ultra-narrow note that rides the object exactly, or a repeating pattern in polarization that circles with its spin, or a punctual flash train in the optical that survives every earthly explanation, the plan already knows what to do, independent confirmation multi-site replication, immediate baseband release to those prepared to analyse it, a schedule of follow-ups that increases cadence without shouting. A public explanation that is careful, transparent and calm. The point is not to win a race, the point is to let the result, whatever it is, be true. And when the passage is over and the traveller is a memory and the corridor is quiet again, you gather what you learned into something that fits on a single page. You redraw the haystack a little smaller. You update the odds you whispered to yourself at 3 a.m. When the control room is empty but for the glow of screens and the soft purr of fans, you look up once more at the dark and imagine threads that might still be tying their way between nights, some that end in our hands, some that hum past unheard. Testing is a kind of love that does not demand to be rewarded. It is enough to have listened well, to have asked the sky a difficult question in a manner it could answer, and to have accepted its answer with a nod, whether that answer is a clear, ringing yes, or the beautiful, instructive silence we have known all along. Suppose gently that the thread we've been tracing holds, maybe not in the loud movie way, but in the soft documentary way, a repeatable clue that ties a passing wanderer, and a long ago note into one larger story. What would change is not only our instruments, it is the shape of our pronouns. We would stretch. Loneliness would not vanish. It would become neighbourliness, which is more complicated and more beautiful. We would not feel smaller. We would feel included. Inclusion has a weight to it, a quiet responsibility to listen well, to answer carefully, to treat the sky as a shared hallway rather than an empty field. On the first morning after such a confirmation, the world would still make coffee, still miss buses, still kiss children goodbye. The ordinary would continue because that is what truth does. It integrates with errands. But a second layer would hum beneath the errands. Newsrooms would practice a new tense of speaking, one that mixes certainty and modesty without letting either overpower the other. School children would learn a new unit of awe. Not just the distance to the moon or the time it takes light from the sun to reach us, but the patience of a hello that took generations to arrive and might take generations to answer. A classroom globe would feel slightly more like a home address and slightly less like a boundary. Science would grow new branches with old roots. Astronomers would sketch first draft maps of a conversation. When the corridor lit, how bright the beam was, what its etiquette seemed to be, steady, pulsed, prime-numbered, drifting with a particular grace. Engineers would start speaking in phrases that sound like poetry when you're tired. Link budgets and beam widths, error-correcting codes and Doppler slopes, the way a planet's spin turns a transmission into a small, regular yodel in frequency. Linguists and mathematicians would meet in the middle to decide what counts as a universal toy. Sequences, symmetries, pictures made of numbers that a mind with different senses could still unfold. Even theologians, whose work is often care for meaning under large skies, would find new metaphors to hold the dignity of both mystery and measurement without forcing them to fight. Art would not wait. Someone would paint the corridor as a ribbon through stardust, heavy with intention. Someone else would write a string quartet that rises for 72 seconds and then rests, not as a gimmick, but as an act of listening. A child would make crayon drawings of lighthouses that shine in straight lines across space. Murals would appear on walls in cities where people do not have telescopes but do have windows. Poets would be annoyingly early with the right words, as usual. And somewhere in a small apartment, a person would hear the story and make a better soup, because inclusion tastes like care. There would be meetings, of course, and we would need them. Not to put wonder into a cage of policy, but to practice cosmic manners. The first rule would be the same as the old medical one: do no harm. Before replying, we would calculate how loud our own beam would be at the sender's sky. We would map our own interference, the acne of our radio noise, and decide what patches to clear, what hours to respect, what power to refrain from, the way you lower your voice in a shared library. Someone would propose that the sky near certain frequencies be treated as national parks are treated. Not empty, but protected, because silence there has value. Someone else would remind us that curiosity is not an emergency. We can let our grandchildren help compose the second sentence. We would also learn the discipline of uncertainty. A link might be real and still be partial. A signal might be deliberate and still be undeciphered for a long time. The world would need phrases that say, "We are sure about this part and open about the rest." That humility would not weaken the magic. It would make it durable. It would inoculate us against the two simplest mistakes: believing too much and believing too little. Between those cliffs is a wide meadow where grown-up wonder lives. We would pitch our tents there. Individually, our inner weather would soften. To know that a meaning crossed the dark and found us is to feel seen without being inspected. It invites better questions at small scales. How do we speak to each other here in this kitchen? How do we become good neighbours locally while learning to be good correspondents cosmically? A discovery like this refuses the old either, or that says you must choose between stargazing and dishwashing. It says both are sacred if done with attention. It says the patient act, listening, stirring, repeating, checking, carries through from soup to signal. Institutions would practice a long breath. Archives would be honoured, because a one-off event gains muscle from the past, and the past needs caretakers who secure tapes and printouts and old voltages the way a museum secures fragile letters. Universities would invent classes with names that sound simple but aren't. Interstellar civics, evidence and etiquette, patience engineering. Funding would be asked for and sometimes granted and sometimes not. The work would continue either way because now it would feel like part of culture rather than a hobby at the edge. Nothing in this would erase the rest of the sky's tricks. Mazes would still sing with no intention. Plasma would still focus and defocus with prankster energy. Reflections would still dab counterfeit notes on our receivers. Knowing a true hello does not make the universe less theatrical. It makes us better critics and kinder audience members. We would still applaud natural performances. We would still submit our data to harsh tests. That is the etiquette of living with wonder. You refuse to be fooled, and you also refuse to be bored. If the connection were ever strong enough to call it contact, even in baby form, there would be gentle rules for our replies. Keep it simple, keep it slow, send something that a mind with different senses could rebuild. A counting song, a picture that emerges from primes, a map not of our streets but of relationships among things we both can see. The rhythm between hydrogen and hydroxyl. The geometry of a hydrogen atom's simplest moods. The notion of time kept by pulsars that tick like universal clocks. And then we would wait. We would measure waiting not as absence, but as participation in a very large cadence. We would tell stories in the meantime that teach children both patience and play. And if after all the care and calculation, the best conclusion still reads like a whisper, real but faint, suggestive but incomplete, that is not a failure. The universe often speaks in clauses that trail into ellipses. We can live with ellipses. We already do. A true link would not certify us as clever or chosen. It would certify us as present. There is comfort in that more than in any anthem. Now let the future loosen its grip and come back to your pillow and your breath. Imagine the sky outside your roofline as a slow ocean. The Milky Way a long breaker that lifts and sets the night. The traveller we've been following is far out on that water, a small leaf of ice moving with the tide, its thin veil of dust like breath on a mirror. Somewhere else, a memory of a narrow note still hangs in the air, of a room where fluorescent lights hummed and a printer chattered and someone wrote a single word in the margin. These are not separate scenes. They are frames from the same film you're watching with your eyes closed. Breathe in as if the beam is finding you. Breathe out as if the beam is letting you go. There is a rhythm to the way receivers pass under starlight, to the way Earth's rotation drifts a patch of sky across an instrument's gaze, to the way a good question rises, holds, and fades into a better quiet. Let your breath match that curve. A gentle climb, a soft plateau, a long, easy fall. The body understands this without math. It was built for tides. Let the constellations unbutton their names and become the simple old things they are, bright beads on a black thread. Picture the heartward direction as a warm lantern, not because it is warmer, but because it feels like company. Picture the corridor we traced as a hallway with good floors and patient light. Set a chair there. You don't have to sit watch. You can leave it empty and know it is waiting. That too is a form of listening. If thoughts arrive, let them be small boats you can wave to from the shore. There goes the question about meaning. There goes the to-do list that believed it was urgent. There goes the temptation to make a grand conclusion tonight. You don't need conclusions in order to rest. You need only a place to set your attention that is wider than your worries and kinder than your deadlines. The sky is good at being that place. Remember how the travellers taught you scale. Light is quick, stones are patient. Beams can cross lifetimes. Pebbles take the scenic route between suns. Your mind can hold both. Your life already does. Quick messages and slow friendships. Sudden brilliance and long, quiet work. Let the examples overlap until they feel like advice. Send clearly when you must. Move gently when you can. Accept that some meetings will be once in a lifetime and still worth everything. If you'd like, give the night a small ritual. Count to 72 in your own way, not as law, just as play. Count breaths or heartbeats, or the soft ticks you can almost hear in the walls. At the end, imagine a hand circling a column of characters not on paper, but in the air above you, then writing one word you choose for yourself tonight. Maybe calm, maybe included, maybe listening. Keep the word without holding it. Let it hover like a firefly. The traveller recedes now, not only in space but in importance, the way a guest fades into a good memory after a kind visit. The corridor does not close. It simply stops, needing your attention. The instruments around the world continue their on-off dance, whether you think of them or not. People in quiet rooms still watch lines on screens with the sort of devotion that used to be given to saints and now is given to data. The work goes on, you are permitted to sleep. Outside, the city sleeps unevenly as cities do. Somewhere it rains, somewhere a fox passes a hedge and pauses, listening in its own spectrum. Above all of it, the galaxy keeps its courteous pace. Clouds drift, satellites wink, a meteor thread unspools and is gone. In that vast, ordinary theatre, you are not an audience member only. You're a participant, practicing the two arts that built this whole story, paying attention and letting go. Let your eyes soften behind your eyelids as if you were focusing on the far edge of the room. Let your shoulders lower by the width of a single star. Let your jaw unclasp like an observatory dome rolling open for a night with nothing dramatic on the schedule and everything to love anyway. If you need a last picture, borrow this one. The world is a small, quiet receiver under a very large sky. It has tuned itself with some effort and a great deal of affection to the possibility of hello. Tonight, you are that receiver. The noise floor is low. The gain is steady. The beam passes. The signal, whether from a neighbour or from the patient universe itself, says only what it has always said. You belong here. Sleep. If you're still here with me, let the room grow one notch quieter and feel the night settle like a soft blanket over your shoulders. We've walked a long hallway together, past the old printout with a penciled exclamation, past the careful mathematics of visitors who do not stay, past the listening fields where dishes tip their pale faces up to the dark. It's enough for now. You don't have to solve anything else tonight. You only have to rest and let the story fold itself gently. Think of what we practiced. Attention without hurry. Questions without demand. Signals that rise, hold and fade with the same grace as a slow breath. Picture that silver thread we followed, not as something that ties you to a mystery, but as a line you can lay down whenever you'd like, a bookmark between waking and sleep. Whenever your thoughts start to scatter, You can touch that thread and it brings you back to the quiet center. A beam passing, a world turning, a listener waiting kindly. If sleep is close, tip toward it. If it's not, that's okay. Watch your breath like a tide. In, the universe arrives, out it drifts. In, the corridor brightens, out, the corridor dims. There's nothing else to keep track of. The big work, telescopes cycling through their on-off dance, algorithms sifting night, archives guarding the fragile past, can continue without you for a while. You're allowed to set everything down. Before you go, offers the night a tiny promise to keep the same gentleness tomorrow that you kept here. Ask simple questions, listen longer than is fashionable, let rare things be rare without grabbing them. That promise is worth more than any grand conclusion. It's how you carry wonder into ordinary rooms, kitchens, bus stops, crowded mornings, without spilling a drop. If you're awake enough to play, try the short ritual we invented together. Count to 72 at a pace that feels like walking beside someone you love. If numbers aren't your thing, count the softest sounds, a far car, a settling pipe, your own slow heartbeat. When you finish, circle the moment in your mind the way someone once circled a column on paper and write your word for tonight. Maybe it's listening, maybe it's included, maybe it's simply home. Keep it not tightly but tenderly like a firefly cupped in two hands. There is room here for gratitude too, not the loud kind, the simple kind. Thank the sky for being patient. Thank the instruments for being stubborn. Thank the people who sit in quiet rooms and watch lines on screen so that you can drift with these ideas and feel safe doing it. And if you like, thank yourself for showing up with curiosity. That's all any of this ever asked. When you wake, the world will still want coffee and keys and shoes. Let it have them, but keep a small piece of this pace in your pocket. Look up once, even through city light, and remember that interstellar is not a headline so much as a posture, a willingness to say hello to what is not from here and to do it kindly. Maybe tonight's traveller is already far down the road. Maybe the next is on the way. The work of noticing will be there when you want it. It doesn't mind if you take your time. If your eyes are still open, soften them until the room blurs and the ceiling becomes a sky. You can place the old receiver above you, not as a relic, but as a symbol. 2 quiet ears, 1 attentive heart. Imagine the beam shape sweeping past exactly the way we described. Brighter at the center, gentler at the edges. Let your body be that pattern now. A calm arrival, a pause, a release. If a thought tugs at you, let it cross the beam and drift away. It doesn't need an argument, it just needs the edge of your attention to be soft. And if you feel a last flicker of wakefulness, just enough to think of other people, send a little lighthouse of goodwill out along your own corridor. Aim it at the places you love, and at the people you miss, and at strangers you will never meet who might be looking up from balconies and doorsteps and dark fields, listening with you in their own way. You don't have to say anything elaborate. The beam can be as simple as, may you rest. May you feel included. When we meet again, we'll pick up the thread where we left it, perhaps with another traveller, perhaps with another quiet archive brought into the light. For now, I'll leave you in the safest part of the night, the part where stories stop needing endings and start becoming sleep. If you're still awake enough to type, tell me where in the world you're listening from and what your sky looked like today. If you're not, that's perfect. Let the comment wait until morning. Dim your screen, unclench your jaw, let your shoulders fall the width of a star. The universe has been here a long time without hurrying you, and it will keep its watch while you rest. Tonight you are a small, steady receiver under a very large sky. The noise floor is low, the gain is kind, the signal is simple. You belong. Good night.